and 10 degrees because of the cloud cover, but chilly start for East Anglia and the southeast, as well as the East Midlands. Low single figures possible in some sheltered spots. However, it's here where we keep the sunny spells into Wednesday afternoon, whilst the area of rain in the north pushes into northern England, eventually the North Midlands, as well as parts of Wales, and tends to peter out. Thursday and Friday look very unsettled with strong winds, showers and longer spells of rain.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on
killed and 64 more injured as the Kremlin launched its biggest airstrikes since the start of the war in February. President Biden also condemned the attacks, saying it highlights the brutality of Putin's war. President Zelensky says Russia's trying to wipe Ukrainians off the face of the earth.
They want panic and chaos. They want to destroy our energy system. They are hopeless. The second target is people, such as time. Such goals were specifically chosen to cause as much damage as possible. But we are Ukrainians. We help each other. We believe in ourselves. We restore everything that is destroyed.
Well, for his part, Russia's President Vladimir Putin says he thinks it was right to retaliate after an explosion badly damaged a Russian bridge and military supply line to the illegally occupied Crimea at the weekend. Putin accused Ukraine of a terrorist attack on the bridge, warning that if attacks continued against Russia, there'd be more retaliatory strikes on Ukraine. Here, Scotland's First Minister says she's going to hold an independence referendum on the 19th of October next year if the UK Supreme Court approves it. Closing the SNP conference in Aberdeen this afternoon, Nicola Sturgeon said leaving the UK would lead to a better relationship with England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Ms Sturgeon also said Scotland would rejoin the European Union. The Supreme Court will hear legal arguments this week before deciding if Holyrood has the required powers to legislate for a second vote. The Chancellor has bowed to pressure to bring forward his much-anticipated medium-term fiscal plan. Last week, in an exclusive interview with GB News, Kwasi Kwarteng said he was going to stick to the original date for mid-November. But today, in a letter to the chairman of the Commons Treasury Committee, he said it'll now be published on October the 31st. Criminal barristers in England and Wales are now back to work after voting to end strike action. They accepted a pay offer from the Ministry of Justice, along with reforms to set fees for legal aid work. Almost 57% voted to take the deal. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel, where now it's time for Farage.
Well, good evening. I'm back after a couple of weeks, and yes, it's all been dominated, of course, by the mess the Conservative government have got themselves into. An attempted tax cut, well, that would never do. The globalists didn't want that. And a huge, humiliating U-turn has resulted. But amongst the other problems mounting up for this government, 35,000 people have now crossed the English Channel, and they're coming at an increasing rate. And yet, here's the funny thing. With this show, I've led the national debate on this. I've woken people up as to what's going on in the English Channel and what the knock-on effects are in this country. When we're talking about it, everybody else is talking about it. And yet, having taken my foot off the brake for the last couple of weeks, I wondered, what would the coverage of the cross-channel crisis be? So I had a look this morning at the Daily Star, nothing. The Daily Mail, nothing. The Financial Times, nothing. The Mirror, the Telegraph, the I newspaper, the Express, the Times, the Guardian, well, not much chance there. And only in The Sun does Trevor Kavanagh give the cross-channel crisis a brief mention. 1,000 people crossed the English Channel yesterday. Haven't got the breakdown, but I'll bet you as sure as eggs is eggs, it'll be over 90% young men. I'll also bet you over half of them are coming from Albania. In fact, they were coming right through the day and night. Yesterday, as I say, confirmed over 1,000 yesterday, and you can see some of the footage of Dover Docks here. And they're coming again today. Today, not quite as big. The wind got up this afternoon. Perhaps today's 300, something like that. I will promise you that on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, the numbers will be huge because we're in for some very, very calm, unsettled weather. And the boasting on TikTok that we've been talking about on this show, that continues. Have a look at this, posted by the Albanian gangs just over the course of the last 24 hours. And what you see... Here's a group going across the sand dunes, and they finish up being apprehended by the French police. That was on the 8th of October, but no matter. The same gang and the same people are back on the 9th of October, and this is what happens. Have a look. And all of that in broad daylight. In broad daylight, there's the dinghy going down the beach and 50 young men about to get in it and head off to the United Kingdom. I heard whilst I was away that the new Home Secretary, who I do rather like, because Suella Braverman at least has had the courage to suggest that we should leave the European Convention on Human Rights and its court in Strasbourg. And actually, unlike previous Home Secretaries, I think she means it, although Liz Truss, it would appear, wants more legal immigration into Britain and hasn't as yet said really very little, much at all, about illegal immigration. But she's giving the French another £50 million, another £50 million to stop the boats leaving the beaches. What is the point of any of it if, as we just saw on that TikTok video, the boat is stopped on the 8th, but the same people come back in another boat and cross on the 9th? It is all a complete and utter waste of time. £5 million a day is what the British taxpayer is now paying to put these people up in hotels. But it's now reached a completely new level because they've run out of what we might call cheap hotels in which to send people. They're now looking at exclusive hotels in some of the most beautiful parts of England. My big question tonight to debate is, when is enough enough? Farage at gbnews.uk. So I learnt over the weekend that Camelot Castle on the north Cornish coast, small village, Tintagel, and of course the place that is famed for being the home of King Arthur. Camelot Castle, a magnificent building on the north Cornish coast, received a phone call from a company working for the government, saying they wanted to book the hotel out. We spoke yesterday to John Mappin, the owner of Camelot Castle.
Initially, I thought it was a joke because I heard from my receptionist that there was this company that they wanted to rent the entire hotel for 12 months, every single room booked. And it's not very often you get a phone call like that. So I actually called the company myself. And yes, in fact, that is what it was. And it was a company trying to source hotels for the asylum seekers or the refugees that are coming in, on the boats or by various different means. Tintagel is the historic birthplace of King Arthur. This is where, mythologically speaking, he was supposed to have been born. Camelot Castle itself sits on a cliff. It has a 270-degree ocean view. It looks out over the, as I say, mythological birthplace of King Arthur. Actually, Camelot Castle was one of the primary tourist destinations in Victorian England. This is where people took their holidays. And it was Brighton, here, and Manchester. It was a hospital during the war. It was also a girls' school during the war. My primary concern is the damage that this does, as I say, to the local community. Also, I had another concern that if these were people coming in from overseas that, let's say, weren't used to our culture, what would they trash the place, or would they damage the hotel? And I said, what would this government solution for that be? And they rather surprisingly said, well, don't worry, just take photographs of the rooms, and if there's any damage at all, it'll all be repaired at the government's expense. Well, of course, that's the taxpayers' expense. The other thing that was shocking to me, absolutely shocking, is I said, well, what would you need the same staffing level? So they said, oh, no, don't worry. You can fire all your staff, and all but 3. And if you don't want to keep those on, we just need the hotel cleaned once a week. And you literally couldn't make it up. And it would be funny if it wasn't for the fact that, a lot of elderly people around here are seriously worried about their bills. They are terrified as to what's going to happen this winter. And surely that is where money should be being spent, is to give such people relief. I find this story completely illustrative of the fact that this government does not think with outcome. It just is solving the problem of the moment. And it's almost like they pick up Twitter in the morning, look at what is getting the most attention, and come up with a wacky policy to solve the problem of the tweet of the day. And that is no way to govern. Personally, I'm of the view that the boat should be turned around and the Navy should be defending our island.
Well, that was John Mappin, the owner of Camelot Castle, and we thought this story really mattered. A beautiful, historic hotel in one of the most amazing parts of the United Kingdom. And clearly, if that hotel was taken for a year or more and filled wall to wall with young men that had recently crossed the English Channel, the effects, the financial effects and perhaps social effects on Tintagel would, I think, have been disastrous. We thought this mattered, so we sent Jeff Moody, our Southwest reporter, down to Cornwall, and he's there in Camelot Castle this evening. Jeff, hello.
Hello, I am indeed. I'm in the ballroom here. It's beautiful. It's incredibly opulent, as you'd expect. You can't really see the views out of the window because it's going dark, but we're surrounded by sea on three sides. It really is the most stunning location. Opulent, yes. Comfortable, yes. Luxury, yes. But there's also a family feel here, a homely feel. The fires are lit, the staff are very friendly. It's a very nice place to be. I've been talking to people this afternoon about how they're reacting to this news, how they're reacting to this proposal. I've been talking to people that are coming down to the hotel just for a night or two. I've been talking to people that work here too. The kind of views we're getting, I would say, are threefold. Firstly, people are saying, well, it's not fair, is it? People are paying guests, I was talking to one guest and, he pays a good amount of money to come and stay here for the night. And the thought that, well, someone's going to stay here for a year for free is not something that sits very easily, particularly at the moment with the cost of living crisis. There's also the issue of employment. This hotel employs many people from the village, and of course not just the employment, but the people that stay here, and Tintagel is a very small community, the people that stay here, shop around here, they use the local restaurants, the local bars, and so they really pay into that industry, into that economy. And finally, the idea of the cultural issue here, the fact that suddenly Tintagel won't be for the Cornish. It will be surrounded by people that don't have that connection with the place. They're not here because they wanted to be here. They're here because that's where they've been told to go. Let's have a look at what some of them said to me earlier on.
In this area, it's very much hospitality, tourism, and I think it'd take away all of that, because Tintagel is a small village and this is one of the largest hotels around here.
Morally, it's a difficult problem with asylum seekers, isn't it? Because some are no doubt escaping persecution and some may be working the system. I don't understand why they want to use such a beautiful hotel, close it down, which would effectively close down the village for at least a year.
Well, it's not something that I think that should be done personally, because you don't know the sort of people that you will be taking on, and otherwise, people are going to be losing their jobs for who knows, a year or maybe more, so I think it's not a good thing personally.
Well, that's some of the views of people who work here and are staying here. Let's speak to John. Nigel, you spoke to him earlier on Zoom, but let's speak to him in person. Hello to you, John. Hello. What a beautiful place this is.
Oh, hi. Thank you very much.
It's gorgeous, isn't it?
Well, very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much. Give me some sense of what the reaction has been since this story broke at the weekend.
Well, we've actually had a lot of phone calls and tremendous appreciation from the local community, but also from, obviously, our staff. Because one of the extraordinary things was that the government's plan, as I understood it, was that we would let go the vast majority of our staff, and obviously they would subcontract a very small number of people to look after the people that they would be placing in this hotel.
Were you tempted at all? Because the government was offering you a considerable sum of money. We know how expensive things are at the moment, how expensive fuel is, etc., etc. Were you tempted to go off on holiday for a year and just cash in and let them get on with it?
Well, I think, you know, for a fleeting moment, the thought crosses one's mind. But certainly I wasn't tempted, because philosophically, I'm completely opposed to the consequences that this policy is having on local communities. The word, you know, cultural destruction is bandied about, but the truth of the matter is this is the destruction of local communities. And I don't think that whoever has come up with this plan has really thought through the consequences. I can see how people and how hoteliers would be tempted, because the amount of money that was offered to us, I mean, it was full occupancy for a year at a very, very generous rate. And I can understand going into a recession with energy costs. If you're a hotelier and you're at the make-break point, I can understand that. But the destruction that this causes is just horrible in the local community.
Well, John, you've said no to the government. The community here is very relieved that you've said no. Your staff is very relieved you've said no. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, and thank you for having me here at this beautiful hotel. I'm going to hit the bar now.
Very good.
Well, Jeff, thank you very much. I'd love to join you in the bar there. And I have to say, well done, John Mappin. I mean, he could have taken a lot of money. He said no to it, and the people at Tintagel would be very grateful. I can assure you, from other parts of the country where this has happened, I get emails, phone calls, texts every day from people who are outraged at what is happening. When is enough enough? When are the government actually going to do something that works? Well, joining me is Border Force and security expert Henry Bolton. Henry, the TikTok video I showed earlier shows the 8th of October, the French police doing their job, stopping them, taking the boat away, no doubt putting a knife in it, so it can't be. 9th of October, the same mob are back on the beach, the same traffickers, and the boat comes across.
They're still operating.
To England. So is there any point giving the French police money?
No, I don't believe there is, Nigel. I think that the government has got this entirely wrong. The French are not going to help. And in fact, if the reports are correct in terms of Macron's comments to Liz Truss when she spoke to him, then he's actually using this as a bargaining chip. Well, that's simply not going to work. And Liz Truss needs to stand up very firmly against this being used as a bargaining chip against the Northern Ireland Protocol. It's simply unacceptable. The two things are entirely different. Well, but Macron is right on one thing, and that is when he said that this needs to be taken in the European context, because to be a little bit fair to the French for once, and I'm quite happy to bash the French, and the French need to be bashed over this, but on the other hand, it's not the French who are letting these people into the European Union and their area of free movement.
Across the Mediterranean.
Across the Mediterranean and through the eastern borders as well. Correct.
And then through Schengen they
so
can
this
move.
Does have a European context as well. But this piece that you've just shown just now as well, I mean, the sheer numbers are awesome. What we're talking about this year now is more than the equivalent of 2 infantry divisions from World War II. Now, I'm not saying these people are soldiers. However, as somebody who's worked in war zones for 10 years of my life, including with refugees, I can tell you that these people crossing the Channel are not refugees.
And yet government agencies say they're not doing anything illegal. I mean, I can't believe this stuff.
Well, I can't. But, you know, the fact of the matter is that most people in this country have been lucky enough never to have been exposed to conflict, never to have actually been in the field with refugees, and actually don't know any different. If somebody said, and it's the same for the Home Office immigration officials who are processing their asylum claims, they don't know any different either. And I know that from my time fighting organised crime in the Balkans, when I actually brought Balkan law enforcement officers to the UK who were stunned at the lack of knowledge that British immigration officers had. And the fact is that if somebody is able to pull the wool over our immigration system and the civil servants who operate it, if they can pull the wool over their eyes, it doesn't mean to say that they are legitimate asylum claimants. It means that they are economic migrants who are simply exploiting the system.
We know, Henry, half of those that come are Albanians,
correct,
boasting they're coming to join criminal gangs to earn cash.
Correct.
I mean,
there is no excuse now.
I mean, we know that's going on. Liz Truss has said precious little on this issue.
And that's worrying.
On legal immigration, she has said she wants to open the doors even wider, perhaps than Mr Blair did, than ever before. Suella Braverman, the new Home Secretary, Priti Patel promised big, delivered almost nothing. She has actually, it's reported, upset Number 10 by suggesting we should leave the ECHR. That would at least be a start, wouldn't it?
She's right. And there needs to be some serious conversations, again, with the UN on the Refugee Convention. Because, let's face it, that convention was written at a time when we were talking about a very different refugee dynamic in places like the Horn of Africa. It was designed for a different purpose to the one that the European continent is facing now.
It's 70 years
Correct.
ago.
It's an entirely inappropriate tool now for today's migration challenges, and the fact that we've all got organised crime operating the way that it does. It simply negates our sovereign rights to defend our own borders. And so this has to be a very robust conversation. That's why it's unacceptable, in my mind, for Liz Truss to accept any conversation with the French on doing a deal on anything.
Henry,
it's unacceptable.
It's not going to change, is it?
I don't think it is. And one of the reasons, Nigel, why I don't think it is because at the end of the day, I mean, I know Suella Braverman, she's got the right intent, she's got the right wish to do something, but she's not got the people around her with the experience and the skills and the knowledge and, in fact, the cultural attitude to deal with it.
It's courage.
It is. There's a lack of courage.
Henry, thank you. Well, look, I mean, next it'll be the Ritz. Why not book the Ritz? Yes, absolutely. Put them all up in the Ritz. Why not? And with it, this government's prospects of winning the next election disappear entirely. Now, we did, of course, approach the Home Office on the back of the request that was made to Camelot Castle. They've given us the very usual bland statement. Interestingly, of course, there is no denial that that conversation took place, and nobody from the Home Office was available for comment. Well, what a surprise. In a moment, let's talk about the 40,000 people in the care sector who lost their jobs because they did not get the jab. Is it time they were reinstated? I think there's a strong case.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Well, some of your reactions coming in to my question of is enough Enough. Darryl says enough was enough about a year ago. Yes, I agree with that. Martin says this has to stop and needs drastic action. But of course, Martin, it's so desperate, they're now going for hotels like Camelot Castle. Paul says, easy to stop, but our corrupt politicians don't want to know. Another viewer says, Australia solved it by turning the boats back. Success. Remember, we had Tony Abbott, the former Australian Prime Minister, here on Talking Pints a few weeks ago. And yes, he stopped the boats coming from Indonesia, so it can be done. Now, do you remember the 40,000 social care workers who lost their jobs because they would not have the jab? Well, a campaign has been launched today by the campaign group Together, and this is their campaign. They say, forcing out approximately 40,000 social care workers for declining the COVID jab was not just unethical, but disastrous for the care sector and those it supports. The sector now has 165,000 vacancies, with 500,000 members of the public waiting for assessments, care or reviews. The situation is grave and urgent, not least as without a functioning care sector, the NHS will collapse. People are invited to sign our letter, our open letter, to the Health Secretary, Therese Coffey, by the end of this month. This matters, and it matters because there are an estimated 13,000 people in the National Health Service, in beds, who should be going out to care homes, but the care sector doesn't have the staff to take them. So a knock-on effect there on a waiting list already of 6.7 million within the NHS is obvious for all to see. The argument was that if you didn't have the jab, you could pass on coronavirus. But what we've learnt is it doesn't matter how many times you've been jabbed, you can still get COVID and you can still pass it on. A battle was fought within the National Health Service over this very same issue, and NHS workers who'd not been vaccinated had a reprieve, and yet 40,000 people lost their jobs in this sector. Surely there should be a reprieve. I think there should be. Well, Dr. David Strain is a clinical lecturer at the University of Exeter, and David Strain joins me now. David, we spoke before. I know you were a great believer that having the vaccine could prevent the individual getting very seriously ill. But now, when you look at this, these 40,000 people, and we know more about COVID and more about the vaccine, isn't there a justifiable case for these people being allowed to be reinstated?
Absolutely. Good evening, Nigel. Yeah, I absolutely agree. We have a health service that is desperately short of workers at all grades, and we've got 40,000 people out there who want to come back and work in the NHS or in the health sector at large. We should be getting them back in. I can fully appreciate the decisions that were made when they were made. At the time those decisions were made, we believed that a full vaccination would reduce your risk of catching it by about 32%, and then risk of transmission further about 60%. But that was very much in the time of Delta. COVID's moved on now. We're in the Omicron wave. We're actually starting to see people get sick again. But importantly, we now fully appreciate that the vaccine's main role is in protecting the person who wants it. And within our country, we have the right to make decisions about our own body. People can choose to smoke. People can choose to do other things that are harmful. If they choose not to get a vaccine, they should be entitled to it. And now we know that being vaccinated doesn't give us the same level of protection for transmission as with Omicron, with Delta. We need to get these people back in the health service as quick as possible.
Yeah, I mean, those arguments, David, and you and I discussed it at the time, was why in the end I chose not to get the booster, because I wasn't convinced that by having it, I couldn't catch it or pass it on. A quick thought, if I may. There is a growing voice out there that says, yes, OK, you can tell us that having the vaccine helps to protect us as individuals. But a growing voice out there saying that, cardiac arrests amongst young men are up by 80%. I mean, there have been side effects of this vaccine too, haven't there?
Yes, there's no doubt that there have been side effects of the vaccine. The vaccine is causing myocarditis, that's inflammation of the heart muscle, in about 0.02% of adult males who get it under the age of 35. A very, very small proportion. But just to put that into perspective, COVID itself is causing exactly the same myocarditis in about 40 times greater risk from COVID as you get from the vaccine. And actually, a lot of these cardiac events, a lot of these cardiac arrests that we are hearing about are actually associated with catching COVID rather than the vaccine. And there has been a lot of misinformation that's being put out about it. That being said, at the moment, if you are fully vaccinated with your primary course and you are under the age of 50, your risk of catching COVID and getting severely unwell with it is sufficiently low that we're not recommending getting the booster. For those of us who are over the age of 50, actually the risk of not having the booster is greater than the risk of having the booster. So for me personally, I was very happy to go there and get this bivalent booster, particularly knowing that the new variants of COVID, the ones that are just in circulation over the last few months and causing hospitalizations, I'm actually seeing people going to ITU again, people needing the drugs that we haven't seen since the Delta wave. So for me, it was that decision, but I'm very much of the mind that if people have the information and they decide not to, that is entirely their rights.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for that. And there we are, folks. There is a change of thinking around this. Now let's go to the front lines, because Kate Blythe is director of a care home group, The Healing Well, and she has got homes in Blackburn and Blackpool. And Kate, I understand that you lost 14 members of staff, people that work for you in this vital sector. Just tell us what that effect has had on those homes.
Well, first of all, good evening, Nigel. Thank you so much for bringing this, airing this subject. There are so many care providers that have warned me to be very careful as to what I say on this programme, as they know I'm quite outspoken. And I said, well, I'm talking to the right chap. It was devastating, absolutely devastating. These were seasoned carers. These were not apprentices, and I have no issue with apprentices. These are mature people that had been in the care industry for 20, 30 years. You could not replace the experience that these people had. To the point where in the Blackburn care home, we never even had the virus, period. Not ever did we have the virus in the Blackburn care home. This year, the hospital sent us a lady. They said they tested her. She was negative. Well, the following day, we tested her, as we do all the time. Our infection control protocols are bar none. And we found that she'd actually come in with the virus. So we isolated her. It didn't go any further than that. And that was the only incident that we'd actually, in the whole period. So losing those staff, 9 members of staff in the Blackburn care home, the hours that the management team were putting in, I did 60-hour shifts consecutively. I will be 66 on New Year's Day, so I'm no spring chicken. And to actually do the hours, the area manager, the manager of the Blackburn branch, the deputy manager, it was all the management team that stepped up to take over the shifts where we could not fill them. It was horrendous until we could manage to get more people in. Blackpool was the same. We didn't have the virus in the Blackpool care home either until a district nurse came in to give insulin to 4 residents. And at that time, we went to test. Well, I was on the safeguarding committee, and I was also vice chair for the care providers. So consequently, I knew a lot of the people that I needed to contact. And I spoke to Rachel at Blackpool Victoria Hospital, to Lorraine, and I said to her, look, from now on, nobody walks through these doors. I don't care whether they're police, paramedics, district nurses, they don't come through. They can verify they do not have this themselves. She passed it on to 4 of my residents in Blackpool, and they all 4 died. And after we cleared it, we'd done a full infection control, and we were free and clear of it, and we've never had it since.
Yeah, that's a terrible story. Well, look, Kate, I very much got behind Steve James. He was part of that campaign for NHS workers not to lose their jobs, to be reprieved if they chosen not to have the vaccine. That was a successful campaign. And I tell you what, I'm right behind this campaign. Those 40,000 workers need a reprieve. And I'd like you to come back in a couple of weeks onto the show and tell me how the campaign's going and whether you're getting the support that you need. So please come back in a couple of weeks and we'll follow up on this story. Yeah, strong stuff. It really is. Now, Nicola Sturgeon, yes, it's the SNP's conference, and she's given her big speech today. Now, the SNP have always claimed that economically they do incredibly well outside the United Kingdom because of oil. Here was Alex Salmond saying just that 10 years ago.
In some ways, Scotland dominates the budget because the only source of revenue that he's been able to call on to do what he wants to do is from Scottish oil revenues, which are now forecast to be £13.4 billion, about £3,000 a head for every man, woman and child in Scotland. And that's the only source of big revenue, because that's the highest total ever from the North Sea, from Scotland's resources, which he's using to make a minor reduction in fuel tax. And without that, he wouldn't have a budget. The Chancellor of the Exchequer would be left totally at sea without Scotland's oil revenues.
So there we are. It's all about oil. That's how Scotland is going to succeed as an independent country. But what about Nicola Sturgeon? What's her financial formula for Scotland breaking away? Well, we heard it this afternoon.
Today, I can announce the first 22 projects have just been awarded funding of more than £50 million. These projects will support the production of green hydrogen, the development of wave and tidal technology, and even pioneer the use of waste from whisky to recycle EV batteries. They will focus on the skills our existing workforce need to take advantage of the renewables revolution.
So there we are. She's going to build wind farms everywhere and Scotland's going to be rich. Haven't you noticed, Nicola Sturgeon? The country, the United Kingdom, is in a deep crisis because we're not energy independent and the lights may well go out in February, something I'll cover tomorrow in more depth. And she says that she detests everything the Conservatives are and they stand for. Well, I have to say, having met Nicola Sturgeon personally, I can quite understand why some might detest her. Her plan is moonshine. It isn't going to work, and Scotland actually isn't going to leave the United Kingdom. Now, I've been away 2 weeks, and I have to say the Conservatives have got themselves into the most unholy mess. Boris Johnson left the country in a very bad economic mess. Energy is at the heart of this, and yet when the Chancellor tries to cut top-rate tax from 45 to 40, there's international outrage because the globalists do not want taxes cut at all. And there's a run on the pound, which incidentally was predicted time and again on this show. Trouble in the gilts market, and it wasn't because of a small tax reduction, which in financial terms was dwarfed by energy bailouts and COVID bailouts. But Liz Truss and Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng lost their nerve. They've U-turned. They now stand as a party for absolutely nothing. They will get wiped out in the next election as they did in 1997. And frankly, they simply deserve it. Now, in a moment, Martin Whittock, historian, will join me. He thinks there's a new Puritan movement in America, that history repeats itself, and that's how Donald Trump got into the White House. Trump and the Puritans? Lots to discuss on Talking Pints.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Well, I'm back after a fortnight. It had to be talking pints, did it not? And I'm joined by historian Martin Wizard. Martin, welcome very much to the programme.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we spoke following the Queen's death.
Yeah.
As the lines of people behind us were queuing.
Yeah, just over there.
Yep, to go and pay their respects at the Queen's lying in state. And I said to you on the programme, it was sort of down the line, I think, but I said to you on the programme, somehow the death of the Queen and us rediscovering what a constitutional monarchy actually is, because none of us ever debated it, really. I mean, you may have done as an historian, but generally, has it brought history back alive a little bit?
I think for many people in the country, it's been a immersive, historical and constitutional education that as we've lived through this extraordinary experience, it's caused us to think a lot more about who we are and what we are and the nuts and bolts about how our constitutional monarchy works. And I think that's a really good thing, because I think one of the weaknesses of democracy is when people take it for granted. And I think every generation, every decade for that matter, has to relearn what a constitutional democracy is all about and what makes us who we are and how we tick. And I think it's been a challenge to us to think a bit more about how the system works. And I think that's been really very positive out of what was, of course, a very sad time.
Yeah, no, a very sad time, but as you say, a very educational time. You see, one of the things that struck me in all the years I've been doing politics, particularly, is how few people in politics know anything about history at all. And I mean, literally anything about history at all. And I wonder, I mean, as somebody who's been an historian and you've taught history and you've written history and you've lectured history and you've been on GB News and the BBC and all the rest of it, do people sort of look at historians as if, well, you know, they're sort of vaguely amusing but not really very important?
With all due respect to our politicians, I'd like to see more historians and fewer lawyers. And that's all, with all due respect. I think if we could balance the historians and the lawyers there, then I think we might get a past perspective, or people who perhaps have done history and then done a law conversion. And I think that I'd like to see more of that in our MPs. You see, so they've got the historical background and then the legal application.
Yeah, because there's so many people now in politics, in media, in public life, who want to apologise for absolutely everything that ever happened at any point in time in history when there were different social mores. And I've no doubt there'll be people in 50 years' time look back at us and think we're barbarians for one reason or another. How, I mean, you've been in the education sector, you're not anymore. Are we teaching history to our kids properly?
That's a very good question. I mean, certainly within my 35 years of teaching history, I was 35 years at the chalk face, not, of course, that we had chalk for the last 20 years of it. But one of the things that we were very keen on was encouraging students to think and ask questions themselves. And obviously, I can't speak for every school, and I can't speak for the whole system, but certainly within my 35 years, within comprehensive education within the UK, within England, we were challenging kids to look at the evidence, follow the evidence, make decisions yourself, look at the complexity, and justify your opinions with evidence.
Critical thinking.
Exactly, and that's transferable skills. We hope that made good
But
historians.
are we teaching critical thinking anymore? Well, it seems we're producing people out of university who think one side of any argument is virtuous and the other side's evil.
And that's the challenge. The challenge is, as I used to say to the kids in my classroom, basically, that there are no subjects out of bounds, within reason, but I want you to feel that you can ask me as a teacher about whatever is crossing your mind that you don't understand. And I think one of the things that we were trying to get was, we were trying to get kids who were resilient, that people could have differences.
No, you can't. No, you need counselling now if anybody upsets you.
Resilience is crucial. And the ability to disagree. So you and I will have conversations. There'll be some things we'll disagree about.
Yes.
And we'll disagree profoundly, perhaps. But at the end of the day, we can have a drink and we can part. We don't throw things at each other. And I think that was one of the things I was always encouraging, and my staff were encouraging, people to be able to face debates, to discuss...
Martin, I don't doubt that you believed in critical thinking and encouraged critical thinking. What I'm saying is I'm worried that our universities are churning out people who've not actually been taught the basics of critical thinking.
And I think that's the challenge. I think we've entered into a particular period within educational experience at the moment where we become very, very nervous to talk about difficult issues. And I think we have to encourage students to do that. And we have to challenge those institutions that say these are issues that can't be discussed. It doesn't mean to say you agree with those issues. It doesn't mean to say that you propound them.
But you discuss them.
But you discuss them, exactly. And I think that's what we have to. We have to challenge all our institutions at every level to look at difficult issues and to discuss things respectfully, to be able to disagree.
We've been through these periods before, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, the English Civil War, the period of Cromwell's reign, the madness that it finished up with, where, celebrating Christmas could be an imprisonable offence.
The rule of the major generals when they were enforcing conformity, absolutely.
So we've seen madness here.
Yes.
I mean, do we keep making the same mistakes as human beings?
I think one of the worrying things is that history tends to teach us that we don't seem to learn an awful lot from history. Now, as a historian, you might say, well, I'm doing myself out of a job there. But I think that is one of the challenges, that I think we do need to look back at periods of time in the past and say, well, what went wrong then? But also, what were the principles that went wrong? Because obviously every generation is different. Now is different to the 1650s. Of course it is. But you can look at principles and you can apply them and discuss those. And I think that's what we need to do.
Because human beings haven't changed, have
No,
they?
Exactly.
I mean, at all. I mean, why does Shakespeare still work? We haven't changed a bit. Now, I'm really fascinated by some of the work you've done. And this really fascinates me. Trump and the Puritans.
Yep.
How the evangelical religious right put Donald Trump in the White House. Now, he's a friend of mine.
Yep.
And I could call him many things. But someone that was attractive to the Puritans, and I find that a bit difficult. Explain.
Well, basically, what the book did was, it came out in 2020, we tried to explore why, for example, the evangelical right within the USA supports Trump. 81% of white evangelicals voted Trump. I calculated that was something like 33.7 million voters. Wow. Extraordinary.
The Bible Belt.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And beyond the geographical Bible Belt. And one of the things that we wanted to do was we wanted to explain how the Trump phenomenon, whatever one thought about it, was rooted in the deep story of American history. It was rooted in how Americans saw themselves, viewed themselves, the narrative they constructed about themselves, which stretched right back to New England in the 1620s. Obviously, it's quite ironic that both the anniversary of the Mayflower settlement arrival and Trump's victory both took place, a similar sort of period of time. Quite dramatic that was. And the anniversary of one coincided with what's happening with Trump as well. And we wanted to say, well, 1620, what at 1620 helped lead to Trump's America. Obviously, he wasn't elected in the end in 2020, but we felt that the roots went back to American exceptionalism, the idea of America being a city on a hill, the idea of America being a new Israel, a new Jerusalem in the wilderness. So these things are freighted with all sorts of problems, I have to add, but they help explain something about how people see themselves in the States and how they felt Trump was going to return to those situations, make America great again. Now, many Americans will say, well, we never stopped becoming great. But clearly, it was rooted in a sense of the past.
And given him and his lifestyle and his background, it's fascinating. You've written, of course, a lot about Soviet Russia and secret services, and Putin, of course, being a product of it. impossible to discuss Ukraine without thinking a little bit about the history of it and what a mess it is.
Indeed.
How does it end, Ukraine?
Well, that's a very good question because, of course, it's a contested deep story as well. I mean, Vladimir the Great, who was baptized in the 10th century, the beginning of Orthodox Russia. It's Kiev Rus. It happens on Crimea, which is why this area is contested, which is why the Russians have this complicated attitude towards Ukraine.
And it's never going to stop.
It's very, very difficult at the moment to see Putin stepping back from the situation that he currently is in, because he's dug himself so deep and he's invested so much into this deep story, and so much of it is about him and how he understands Russia. It is very difficult at the moment to see him stepping back from the situation that he has created since February this year.
No, I agree. And you're a strong Christian.
Yes.
A lay preacher. You've written an extraordinary book about Jesus Christ, the unauthorised biography.
Indeed.
We haven't really got time for all of that. But there's no doubt, is there, that the Judeo-Christian roots underpin all that the West is?
Very much so, and I think we need to recognise that. Very often people say that we are rooted in Enlightenment values of the 18th century without looking at the fact that the Enlightenment itself was rooted in a Judeo-Christian belief in the importance of the individual, of the importance of the mind, the importance of debate and discussion. So the roots of our society and of Western European society, which we have in common with Europe, it goes back to its Judeo-Christian roots. Now, that has plenty of room for other people as well, absolutely. We're not talking about exclusivity,
but we need to
recognise it and celebrate it too. Absolutely.
Martin, we could discuss this for hours. We can't, but I thank you for joining me on Talking Pints.
Thank you for having me.
Let's have a go at Barrage the Farage. What have you got for me today? One viewer asks, should England be independent? No, I think the United Kingdom is going to hold together. I don't think Scotland's going to break away. I don't think Sturgeon's economic promise of lots more wind turbines really works. UK stay together? Break up?
I hope so. I'm half Welsh. I've got good friends who are Scottish. I want the UK stay together, and I say yes, it will.
Yeah, I think it will too. Mickey asks, can the West stand by and watch Putin slaughtering civilians? Surely he must be stopped. Well, Mickey, arguably we've done a fair bit already with weapons we've provided and everything else. We haven't directly got ourselves involved in this, have we?
Rightly so. We must not have a head-to-head between NATO and Russia. I think it's important that we continue to support Ukraine and accelerate that, but we cannot have a head-to-head between NATO and Russia because of the potential catastrophic...
Do you think the UK government have got this, if nothing else, have got this right?
I think so.
Yeah, interesting. Mick asks, how does Nicola Sturgeon get away with being such a failed leader in Scotland? Well, Mick, you can say failed, but she keeps on getting an awful lot of votes. And it's a funny thing with the first-past-the-post electoral system. You can get millions of votes and almost no seats. I know all about that. Or you can get a good number of votes and win nearly all the seats. It's very, very odd the way first-past-the-post worked. It's worked massively in the SNP's favour in Scotland. Under PR, they'd have had fewer than half the seats. It's a really, really funny thing. One viewer asks, we're never going to solve the migrant crisis, are we? These are historic... I mean, I'm not going to get you involved deep in the debate, but these are historic movements of people from Africa coming in to Europe, and if all the while Europe says yes, you can stay, they're going to keep coming, aren't they?
We are in the middle of quite extraordinary turbulent times. I mean, the Roman Empire would have recognised this. Other parts of history would recognise as well the huge movements of people. And with global warming likely to increase and many parts of sub-Saharan Africa become increasingly difficult to live in, this could well be more of the future. So how we meet this and how we adapt ourselves and how we work with this challenge is going to be the challenge not only of our own, but of the next generation as well. It's not going away.
I mean, there's no guarantee that the temperature is going to rise in the next 50 years. I just want to sort of caveat that. But yeah, I mean, it is a terrible, terrible problem. And Ryan asks, have you turned on the central heating yet? Well, Ryan, I have to say, I think the misjudgment of our energy policy of basically every leader for the last 25 years has led us to this catastrophic mess. And whatever they do, the lights are probably going to go out in February of this year. We need a complete rethink. It's time for us to be energy independent. But that's enough from me and my thoughts for today. Back with you tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Mark Stein will be joining you in a few moments. But before that, let's get the all-important weather.
Hello, Aidan McGivern here with the latest forecast from the Met Office. Clear spells for many overnight, and that means, of course, it will be chilly in places, particularly in the south, whilst a bit more of a breeze and showers continue in the north, especially for northern Scotland and the northwest of Scotland, where tight isobars remain just to the south of an area of low pressure moving into Norway. And it's in this area where we'll see further spells of cloud and showers overnight, along with a keen breeze. A bit more shelter there for the east of Scotland, as well as for much of England and Wales, Northern Ireland, keeping clear spells overnight as well. So where we get the clear spells, temperatures into the mid or even low single figures, and perhaps for some of the more sheltered spots across central parts of England, 0 degrees. So certainly a cold start to the day on Tuesday. Milder for the northwest of Scotland, where we'll see further showers from the word go. They'll also affect parts of Northern Ireland. And then those showers turning to perhaps more persistent rain later in the afternoon. We'll also see 1 or 2 showers for southern Scotland, northern England, but further south, dry, with plenty of sunny spells, particularly in the south of England and South Wales, with 15 or 16 Celsius and with light winds as well. So feeling quite pleasant here. 13 or 14 degrees for Scotland and Northern Ireland, but it does turn increasingly wet into the evening, with spells of rain pushing in from the Atlantic, heavy and persistent over western hills. A bit more ragged in its appearance there across eastern Scotland and northern England, North Wales. So I think the rain on and off through the night, but certainly by dawn, many places seeing thick cloud and outbreaks of rain, and 10 degrees because of the cloud cover. But a chilly start for East Anglia and the southeast, as well as the East Midlands. Low single figures possible in some sheltered spots. However, it's here where we'll keep the sunny spells into Wednesday afternoon, whilst the area of rain in the north pushes into northern England, eventually the North Midlands, as well as parts of Wales, and tends to peter out. Thursday and Friday look very unsettled, with strong winds, showers and longer spells of rain.
Weekday